today. We're going to have a little talk about this. Has anyone read the Ramayana? Put your hand up if you read the Ramayana. Oh, there's a few people here. Okay. Not everyone. So we're going to tell you the story from the Ramayana. You know, the Ramayana is it's one of the greatest, it's said to be one of the greatest stories of India, ancient India. And it was written down in this famous book called the Ramayana by the sage Valmiki. He written about 1 million years ago. So that tells us history of a famous divine king named Lord Ramachandra, who appeared some 2 million years ago in the Treta Yuga. So according to the Vedic scriptures and Vedic authorities, Lord Ramachandra and his wife Sita Devi are actually direct incarnations of Lord Vishnu and the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi. So why have they come to the earth from the spiritual world? And Krishna tells us in the Bhagavad Gita that he himself appears on earth every 4,320,000,000 years. And at other times he appears in various incarnations, like Lord Ramachandra. And Krishna also describes their mission, which is to deliver the pious devotees, annihilate the miscreants, and re-establish the principles of religion, which are the Lord's direct instructions to mankind. So Krishna, we know that Krishna also comes especially to reciprocate the love of his dear loving devotees. So someone may wonder, what is a miscreant? So the miscreant is someone who has the spirit of challenging the established order of the Lord. And at this particular time in history, 2 million years ago, there lived a very cruel and very powerful demoniac king named Ravana. Actually, the very word Ravana literally means one who causes crying to others. It's a terrible name. So he was a great atheist who wanted to challenge Ram's authority, and his only business as a demoniac king was simply to destroy Brahminical culture, disturb and harass the Lord's devotees, and try to establish a godless civilization here on earth. Therefore, to rid the earth of this demoniac influence and protect his dear devotees and re-establish true religion and Vedic culture, the Lord descended from the spiritual world in his form as Lord Ramachandra. And he played the part of an ideal, godly, saintly king. Actually, the story of Lord Ramachandra begins with his dear father, King Dasarath, who himself was a very pious, religious, saintly king, Rajrishi, who ruled the earth for many thousands of years, actually. So it is said that King Dasarath, he was standing on the 7th floor of his multi-story palace, and he was looking over the capital city of Ayodhya. But he was feeling very distressed, anguished, lost in thought, praying to the Lord. So why was he in this state? Because he was getting old, and he had no son to heir the kingdom. So he was thinking, who will protect the earth and its residents? Because if there's no saintly, powerful king to rule, then what happens is so much degradation and pestilence and thieves and rogues and so many irreligious things start happening in the world. So he called a meeting. He called a meeting for all the leading brahmanas, the leading warriors and citizens, and he explained the situation. What's going to happen to the earth. Suddenly, the head priest had announced that he'd heard from Lord Brahma's son, Sanat Kumar, that the king would soon be blessed with 4 divine sons who would be direct incarnations of the Supreme Lord. And actually he explained that there was already auspicious signs seen in the heavens, that something very, very auspicious was about to happen. So the news spread. The whole city of Ayodhya was just filled with excitement. There was a great festival happening in the city. And King Dasarath felt so much joy in his heart. But he knew within his heart that nothing can be achieved unless the Lord is pleased. So he just decided to perform a great yajna for the Lord's pleasure. So many distinguished guests were invited, famous brahmanas, priests were brought in to perform the yajna. Soon blazing fires were burning, Vedic mantras were chanted. King Dasarath was distributing millions of gold coins in charity. So part of the yajna, which they performed in this particular age, was they had to invite the demigods and make an offering to the demigods. So the demigods were summoned, and soon they appeared in the clouds, in the sky, headed by Lord Brahma to receive their offerings. And at that time, the demigods, meeting Lord Brahma, they requested he pray to Lord Vishnu to appear on the earth and rid the earth of this demoniac king Ravana, who was tyrannizing the universe, causing so much suffering. So just at that moment, Lord Vishnu appeared in the sky, and he was smiling, and he said in a deep, resonating, reassuring, deep voice, declaring that he would soon appear as the son of King Dasarath. So everyone was, wow, very happy. King Dasarath was very happy, so much joy. And then the sacrificial fire was continuing, and just at when it was almost over, in the final rituals of the yajna, the last offerings were made, and suddenly, from the sacrificial fire, appeared this amazing, shining, beautiful personality. This came out of the fire. And everyone was just watching in wonder. And then he descended. He descended near the king. And in his hand, he held this golden pot filled with celestial nectar. He introduced himself as a messenger of Lord Vishnu, and he handed this golden pot of nectar to the king. And he said to the king, "Take this nectar prepared by the gods and give it to your wives, and thus you will receive 4 divine sons." So the messenger of Lord Vishnu suddenly disappeared into the fire. Of course, all the yajna priests, they realized that the yajna was a success. They all cried out, "Victory! Victory!" So the king, he distributed that nectar in that golden pot to his 3 wives. And after 4 seasons had passed, first Ram was born, and then Bharat, and then the twin sons, Lakshman and Satrugna. These are the 4 divine sons or incarnations of the Lord, who appeared as the sons of King Dasarath. So all these boys, being incarnations, they just shone brightly. And everyone rejoiced. The demigods were showering flowers. King Dasarath was giving large quantities of shining jewels to the Brahmanas. And he arranged a huge feast for all the citizens in Ayodhya. So these four brothers, Ram was especially glorious. His all-attractive body was the colour of celestial emerald, like a greenish, had a greenish complexion. He was dressed in the finest silks, adorned with golden ornaments. He simply captured the minds and the hearts of everyone. Everyone in the whole city of Ayodhya just loved Ram so much. He was devoted to his father's service. He took great delight in the science of archery. He quickly mastered the art of military warfare. Yet it was noted that despite his being very, very powerful, he was very gentle, he was very kind, tranquil, always softly spoken, humble, mild, self-controlled, full of tolerance, full of compassion. He was truly, you could say, the embodiment of all those auspicious godly qualities. You know, once, after completing a mission of killing two powerful demons when he was a young man, the two princes, Ram and Lakshmana, they came across the palace of Janaka, King Janaka, where they were very well received. So at that time, King Janaka, he explained to Rama that once he was preparing the sacrificial ground with a golden plough, and a wonderful female child just appeared out of the earth. And that child became our daughter, and we called her Sita. So King Janaka, he stated to Ram that he will give her in marriage to whoever can show exceptional power and strength and prowess. Then the king, he went on to explain that a tournament, a special tournament, was soon to take place in the palace hall. And the one who can hold and string the mighty bow of Lord Shiva will win the hand of Sita. So this bow of Lord Shiva, it was kept in an iron chest. It had been a special gift from the demigods to King Dasarath. It had been kept in the king's family for many generations. So, King Janaka had very strong men carry this chest with this mighty bow of Lord Shiva into the palace hall. And after a few days, many famous, powerful kings and princes, they came from near and far, arriving, hoping to win the hand of the beautiful princess Sita. So the tournament began. However, none of the princes or any of the kings, they couldn't even slightly lift this bow, let alone string it. So finally King Janaka, he looked over at Ram and he indicated for Ram to come forward and enter the tournament. So Ram, he just humbly stood up amidst the royal assembly. He came forward, he offered his obeisances to the mighty bow of Lord Shiva. He circumambulated that bow. Then he turned to King Janaka and he said, "I wish to attempt your test." Meanwhile, standing in the balcony of the palace, way high up, was Sita. And she was watching Ram approaching the bow. And she felt so much love for him in her heart. All her life she prayed that Lord Vishnu might become her husband. And because she's Krishna's eternal consort, Lord Vishnu's eternal consort, she had this natural love for him already there in her heart. So after receiving the king's permission, Ram suddenly seized that bow. He raised it high in the air, above his head, and he strung it effortlessly. Everyone was just astonished, amazed. Now, how did he do that? Then he pulled the bow back, he strung the bow, he bent the bow back, and suddenly it snapped. He snapped that bow, even though no kings or princes could even lift the bow. He picked it up, he pulled it back, and he snapped the bow. It said he snapped. It was just like he did it effortlessly, just like an elephant breaks a piece of sugar cane. Everyone was stunned, because when he snapped that bow, it made this mighty crash. So Ram, at that time, he'd proven his divinity. He'd won the hand of Princess Sita. And she came down from the balcony. And she put a garland around Ram's neck, indicating her acceptance of him. And then she was just standing there, and she shyly lifted her eyes and looked at Ram, who caught a glance in his eyes, and both of them felt their hearts just moved with love. So soon after this, a terrible tragedy happened. Sometime after, while preparing for Ram's coronation to be king, suddenly King Dasarath's youngest wife, who, you have to understand, her mind had been polluted by an evil-minded maidservant. She reminded the king that he had promised her 2 boons. You know, once during battle, King Dasarath was, because in those days the kings would lead the armies into battle. They weren't just sitting in the background. He was grievously wounded, and it took actually years for him to fully recover. And during that time, his youngest wife, she nursed him back to health. And he was so pleased with her that he said he offered her 2 boons. So she reminded him of those 2 boons. And she wanted to receive those boons now. And she declared, for my first boon, let my son Bharat be installed as king in Ram's place. And for the second boon, let Ram be exiled to the forest for 14 years. When King Dasarath, he just stood there. He just was gazing at his wife in utter disbelief. He couldn't believe the words that were coming out of her mouth. It said he was seized by this agonizing anxiety, and he was pleading with her. But despite his pleas, she remained unwavered in her decision and desire. And finally, King Dasarath, he just dropped to the ground, crying, calling out Ram's name. And his love for Ram was so deep, he just felt totally heartbroken. Yet, as a saintly king, there's nothing he could do. He was bound by the codes of religion, the codes of piety, the codes of morality, the codes of duty and virtue. He was a saintly king. He was bound by these codes. And he promised his wife these 2 boons. He realized he was helpless. So when Ram heard what had happened, he didn't become angry, but he calmly accepted his fate. He came before his royal father. He paid his obeisances, because his father, he was just weeping loudly at that time. And then Ram, he just left the city of Ayodhya, accompanied by his wife Sita, his brother Lakshman, and they entered deep into the forest. Actually, when the people of Ayodhya heard that he was being exiled to the forest, there was thousands and thousands of people trying to follow him into the forest, because they loved Ram so much. But and Ram was telling, go back, but they wouldn't go back. Then in the middle of the night, Ram, Lakshmana and Sita, they got up in the middle of the night and they just took off into the forest while everyone was sleeping. So, what happened is when news spread that Ram's exile, that the whole city was just plunged into sorrow and lamentation out of the intense love and separation from Ram. It actually is said that even the leaves and the creepers were withering. The animals had wretched expressions on their faces. Everyone was just plunged into complete depression because of their love for Rama and Sita. So while they were in the forest, one day in the forest, Rama and Lakshmana were confronted by one of Ravana's powerful armies. And a fierce battle took place, in which Rama and Lakshmana killed 14,000 Rakshasas. When Ravana heard about this, he was just enraged. He wanted to get some revenge. So he derived a very demoniac plan. Soon after that, this demoniac King Ravana, using his mystic powers, he secretly kidnapped Ram's wife, took her to his palace in Lanka, and to try to convince her to give up her attachment to Rama and become his queen and his lover. Rama is such a horrible, lusty, demoniac person. Sita she furiously rebuked him. She declared that she would rather die, and that Ravana and his race would soon be annihilated by Ram. Now, hearing Sita's stinging words, Ravana threatened her. He said, if you do not yield to me within 1 year, you shall be killed by my cooks and served to me for my dinner. Now, these Rakshasas are actually cannibals. They eat humans. He was telling them, if you don't yield to me within 1 year, my cooks will come, cook you up for my dinner. Now, Sita was just, this whole event, she was just grief-stricken. She just wept bitterly. She couldn't find any peace of mind. She's being tormented by the Rakshasas, kept in a prison in the palace. Meanwhile, when Ram had actually heard what had happened, when he realized what had happened, he was so angry, he was so enraged. It said actually his eyes became like red copper. And he shouted out in this thunderous voice, this Rakshasa race will soon be extinct. So there's, of course, during that time, he teamed up with Sugriva, the king of the monkeys, and Hanuman. Together they formed this very powerful army. Millions of fierce monkeys and bears. And then Sugriva, he divided his army of monkeys into 4 groups. Then he sent them out north, east, west, and south to find Sita. Meanwhile, Ram turned to Hanuman and he said to Hanuman, I believe by your devotion and by your love that you will find Sita. Then Ram took off his ring and he gave it to Hanuman. He said, when you find Sita, you give her my ring and tell her that I'm coming to save her. So we know that suddenly Hanuman, he just expanded himself like 50 times bigger. He was this huge Hanuman. And he climbed to the top of this mountain. And then he said, with folded hands, he said out loud with love and devotion in his heart, "Victory for Ram!" Then he crouched down. Then he shot up through the air. And he went all the way across the ocean to Ravana's kingdom. Then arriving in the city, he made himself really small, like a tiny little Hanuman. And he went around, snuck around the city undetected. And then he found Sita. Of course, she didn't know whether Hanuman was a friend or foe, or just a Rakshasa in disguise. But then he brought out Ram's ring. Then she knew that he was a messenger from Ram, and she was so happy in her heart that Ram was coming to save her. Of course, while Hanuman was there, he made himself big again, and then he destroyed all, Ravana's favourite gardens and half his palace, and destroyed so many buildings, and he was attacked by so many Rakshasa soldiers, and he killed thousands of them. And they finally caught him, and they set his tail on fire, and then he went all around the city. He escaped, went all around the city, set half the city on fire. Then he sprang back across the ocean, and he came before Ram. Then Ram, with tears of love, he just embraced Hanuman. And he told him, "I am forever indebted to you for what you have done." So this is the interaction of love on the spiritual platform. The Lord is giving all credit to his devotee, and the devotee takes no credit for himself. He's giving all credit to the Lord. So that's Hanuman's love for Ram, and Ram's love for Hanuman. At around this time, Ravana, he had a brother called Vibhishan. Vibhishan, he wasn't a demon like Ravana, but actually he was a very pious, pure devotee. And he was even though he had great respect and honor for Ravana, he was always trying to give him good advice. And when he advised Ravana, "Please return Sita, otherwise your whole dynasty will be annihilated." Ravana, instead of you give through good advice, he becomes angry. Ravana became so angry, he decided he was going to kill his own brother. However, Vibhishan managed to escape, and he left Lanka to take full share of his Lord Ram. So when he arrived in Ram's camp with his two ministers, he came before the devotees of Ram. And he said, "I want to see and surrender our lives to Lord Ramachandra." So they summoned Ram. Ram came. And Ram, when he arrived, he asked everyone's advice. "What shall we do?" Said first Sugriva, the king of the monkeys. He said, "We should kill him. He is Ravana's brother." All others present, they were saying the same thing. "We cannot trust him. We should kill him immediately." Then before everyone present, Ram spoke out his famous declaration. This is Ram's famous declaration. He said, "I proclaim today that if anyone, even one time, says to me, 'I am yours,' whoever they are, I promise to protect them forever. I will accept that person as my own. I proclaim these words for all time to come. Bring Vibhishan here. He is now part of our family." Sugriva, he was so powerful, the king of the monkeys. He was very, very fearful and fierce and powerful. And crying, he said, "My dear Ram, you are so kind. You are so merciful. You are the kind friend of one and all. So that we know the story, Ram's supreme mystic power, him, his mighty army, they built this huge bridge to Lanka, to Ravana's kingdom, out of floating rocks, 80 miles wide, 800 miles long. Some people may think that's a bit far-fetched, floating rocks. But I tell you, when there's one devotee, he went to South India, Yugoslavia, and he came to the Bhakti Center to give us some talk about his trip. He had a bucket of water, and believe it or not, he had some of those floating rocks that were actually floating in that bucket on the water. These rocks are still there in South India, and they float. So they built this huge bridge, 80 miles wide, 800 miles long. There's Ravana's powerful army. They crossed the bridge, surrounded Ravana's mighty city. So then Ram, being the perfect diplomat, he diplomatically offered Ravana an opportunity to surrender and return Sita. He said, we won't attack. You just return Sita, we'll go and we'll leave. So here we know, Ravana, when he heard that, he was, this whole army surrounded his city. He just went into a fit of fury. As they said, he began hissing like a trampled snake. He became so angry. How dare these people come here and threaten me? So he made his reply pretty clear. He wasn't going to surrender. So what did Ram do? He immediately turned to this massive army, and it is said in this thunderous voice, he shouted, "Charge!" And soon a very, very vicious battle took place between millions of Rakshasa army soldiers with their flaming maces and javelins and axes and all their different weapons. And there was millions of fierce monkeys and bears armed with their razor-sharp teeth and claws and huge boulders, throwing huge boulders and uprooting trees. And also the many commanders on both sides were exchanging all their different weapons. So they battled on for many, many days. Both armies just fighting very passionately. But what happened is soon Ravana realized that he was being defeated in this war. His own brother. What was his brother's name? Was it Kumbha? It's Kumbhakarna. Yeah, Kumbha. Actually, he was such a big, powerful demon that when he was killed, when he fell down, just one of his arms crushed 2,000 monkey soldiers, killed them. It's a huge demon. So when Ravana realized this, his own dear brother had been killed, his 100 heroic sons, and many commanders had been killed, he became just furiated. And he roared as he said, when he roared furiously, flames just shot out of his 10 mouths. He had 10 heads. The flames were shooting out of his 10 mouths. And he mounted his chariot and he just madly plunged into the monkey army, just killing thousands of them. At this time, Ram himself decided to show his insurmountable progress. He was moving like a whirlwind, releasing hundreds and thousands of arrows within a few moments, killing hundreds and thousands of Rakshasas. Around that time, Ram's dear brother Lakshmana he got into this big fight with Ravana. And Ravana had this special lance, and he pierced Lakshmana through his armor into his chest. And Lakshmana was grievously wounded. And Ram was really he just became completely, overwhelmed seeing his brother lying like that. And he was going there to pick him up, and they were shooting arrows at him, and Ram didn't care. He just picked up his brother, and then he he took out that lance. And I think he sent Hanuman to get the special herbs to cure it. But at that time, Lakshmana, he turned to Ram and he said to Ram, "You have taken a vow to kill Ravana. O great hero, fulfill your vow at once. Let us see this evil Ravana lying dead on the battlefield." So what happened is immediately this terrible anger took hold of Ram as he seized his bow and he went forth to attack Ravana. Ravana responded by sending these celestial missiles. He had a lot of very amazing celestial weapons. So he released one celestial missile which unleashed hundreds and thousands of vicious serpents that were speeding towards Ram to kill him. So Ram, he also invoked his celestial arrows, and he shot them into the air. And they turned into thousands of golden eagles with very fierce talons and beaks. They just tore those serpents to pieces. These are just some of the events of the battle, using these mystical weapons. In this way, Ravana, he sent so many weapons to destroy Ram. But, Ram foiled all these attempts, counteracted all these weapons with his own arrows and mystical weapons. Actually, Ram, he sent a whole fierce volley of arrows which pierced Ravana's 10 heads at every part of his body. Just sending reeling. And at that time, also the monkey soldiers were just showering his chariot with rocks and trees. And Ravana he was practically lying semi-conscious, and his charioteer, just to save his life, was taking him from the battlefield, running. And then Ravana came to his senses and chastised his chariot driver, said, "Take me back to the battlefield." In this way it is said, that Ravana and Ram, they fought like two angry lions for many years. Hundreds and thousands of missiles, arrows, celestial javelins were exchanged. Because at this time all the demigods were in their airplanes observing the battle. They battled on for many, many hours. However, after many hours of fighting, Ram, he brought his chariot right up before Ram. And he shouted out to Ravana in a very grave voice, "You are the most abominable of man-eaters. Indeed, you are like their stool. You resemble a dog. For as a dog steals edibles from the kitchen in the absence of the households, in my absence you kidnapped my wife Sita. Therefore, as Yamaraj punishes sinful, shameless men, I shall punish you now." Then Ram, he fixed a celestial Brahmastra arrow to his bow. And when he released that arrow, that Brahmastra arrow, it is said that it roared like a tumultuous ocean. piercing Ravana's heart like a thunderbolt. And Ravana, it said, he let out this very loud cry that just shook the earth. He dropped down his bow. He was vomiting blood from his 10 mouths. He wheeled around, fell off his chariot on the ground dead. Because all the demigods were very happy. They're all showering flowers, beating drums of victory. And then all the leading demigods, they came down on the scene. Lord Shiva came before us, thanked Ram. Indra came, thanked Ram. Actually, at that time, Indra wanted to give a benediction to Ram. And Ram smiled. He said to Indra, bring all the slain monkeys that was killed in the battle back to life. So Indra, by his mystic power, all the slain monkeys came back to life. So after this, he installed Ravana's pious brother as a new ruler of Lanka. Ram, Sita, Lakshmana, and this huge army of monkeys, they all boarded this huge celestial chariot. It's like this big spaceship. They went back to Ayodhya. And at that particular time, Ram's 14 years of exile had ended. Then, after being bathed and dressed in fine silks and decorated with jewelry and celestial garlands, Sita and Ram mounted the royal chariot and they moved to the city of Ayodhya, smiling radiantly at all the citizens. And the citizens were they were feeling so much separation out of their love for Ram, that when they saw him coming through that city, they were just shedding tears of joy out of intense love. And the early next day, Ram was crowned king of the world. You know, in those days, the kings weren't just king of one country. Actually, they were king of the whole world, the whole planet Earth. And from that day, Ram, he expertly ruled the earth for 11,000 years. And he set the perfect example of what it means to be a true leader. It is said, he cared for his citizens exactly like a loving father cares for his own children. Everyone was happy, everyone was satisfied, devoted to serving Ram. Everyone in that kingdom went back to Godhead at the end of their life. So after ruling the earth for 11,000 years, Ram, he decided it was time for him and his brothers to return back to the spiritual world. So first he coronated his 2 sons, Lava and Kusha, to rule the earth. Then Ram, he dressed up in these fine white silk clothes, and boarding his golden royal chariot along with his brothers, he went in procession up to the foothills of the Himalayan mountains, followed by hundreds and thousands of citizens, practically the whole city, including the birds and the animals and the cows, the little squirrels. They all followed Ram up to the foothills of the Himalayas. And suddenly, when they arrived, millions of celestial chariots appeared along with Lord Vishnu and the demigods. And then within the sight of all, what happened is Ram and his brothers, his divine brothers, entered Vishnu's form. Then all the citizens present at that time, they gave up their mortal material bodies, accepted their eternal spiritual forms, and were carried by those chariots back to Ram's eternal abode. Lord Ramachandra, Spirit Stay, Lord So we're having a nice festival today, and hopefully everyone can come. It starts at 4 p.m. And we have Krishna Goswami. He's going to give a special talk at 4:30. So everyone should try and come, for that part of the very nice program. We have a beautiful feast being cooked. I think it's a team effort. We have like about 6 of our cooks. 6 cooks are going to come in and churn out a beautiful feast. So Hare Krishna. Jai Ramachandra ki.